The HOA president showed up at my door at exactly 6:45 a.m. on a Saturday. No knock, just a furious ringing of the doorbell like she was trying to summon the dead. When I opened the door, there she was, Glenda Simmons. Tight perm, floral blouse buttoned to her throat, clipboard in hand like it was a badge of honor. Her nose wrinkled the second she saw me. "Victor Tanner," she said, like the name tasted sour. "We have a serious violation to address." I sipped my coffee and leaned against the doorframe. "Morning to you too, Glenda," she pressed her lips together. "You're in violation of Article 7, Section 14 of the HOA Guidelines. Unauthorized solar panel installation. You didn't submit an application for approval." I blinked. "You mean the solar panels I installed 6 months ago? The ones that passed city inspection and have been powering my entire house?" She tapped her clipboard. "You'll need to remove them. You have 10 days to comply," I laughed. "You're not serious," her eyes narrowed. "This community has standards, Mr. Tanner. We can't have people turning their roofs into science experiments." I stared at her, and her smug little expression told me this was personal. Glenda had been trying to pick a fight with me ever since I refused to join her beautification committee last year. Now that she'd found a reason to harass me, she was going to squeeze it for all it was worth. "You want me to tear down a fully permitted, energy-efficient system because you don't like how it looks? It's against the rules," she said. "And if you don't comply, the HOA will begin daily fines. $200 per day." I didn't say a word. I just stared at her until she turned and walked off, her heels clicking across my driveway like a gavel. Here's the thing: Glenda didn't know the HOA didn't actually own the strip of land their community center and pool sat on. I did. It was a weird twist of paperwork from over 15 years ago when the original developer defaulted and sold off parcels to cover debt. I had bought it dirt cheap back when I worked in real estate zoning. It had just sat there, unimportant, until now. The HOA had a sweetheart lease deal for $1 a year. It had never gone up because no one ever questioned it, but if Glenda wanted to play games, it was time I opened my files. I waited until Monday morning to make my move. The HOA's office, really just a converted room in the community center, opened at 8. I showed up at 8:15 with a folder under my arm and a coffee from the bakery down the street. The woman at the desk, Lorraine, blinked up at me from behind her tortoise-shell glasses. "Mr. Tanner," she said, startled. "Are you here for the board meeting?" "That's not here for the meeting," I said. "Just need to drop something off for Glenda. It's time sensitive." She hesitated. I could see the reluctance in her eyes, but she eventually held out her hand. I gave her the folder and left without another word. Inside was a certified notice of lease modification. Effective immediately, the annual rent for the land beneath the community center, swimming pool, and tennis courts was increasing from $1 to $24,000. That broke down to $2,000 per month, a fair rate, considering the square footage and location. It wasn't gouging. It was reality, and the lease gave me the right to adjust the rent with 30 days' notice. They'd been coasting on a technicality for years. That grace period expired in 4 weeks. I didn't expect fireworks right away, but I didn't have to wait long. At 6:30 that evening, someone pounded on my front door like they were trying to break it in. I opened it calmly. Glenda stood there, her blouse wrinkled for the first time in recorded history, her face flushed with heat. "You've lost your mind," she hissed. "You think you can just raise the rent on us like that? That land belongs to the community." I kept my voice even. "No, Glenda, that land belongs to me. I have the deed, the lease, and the payment history. All legally documented. You've known about the lease. You've signed the last 3 yearly renewals yourself." "That's not the issue," she snapped. "You can't just throw that kind of expense at us out of nowhere. The HOA budget doesn't have room for this. Maybe you should have thought of that before trying to fine me over solar panels. You're enforcing rules like a petty tyrant, but your own foundation's built on borrowed ground." She stepped forward, jabbing a finger toward my chest. "This is extortion," I raised an eyebrow. "It's not extortion if the lease allows it, and it does." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. For once, she was speechless. "Also," I added, reaching into my shirt pocket, "here's a copy of the lease addendum. You can have your lawyer look it over. It's airtight." She snatched the paper from my hand like it burned her. "I'll see you in court," she spat. "I hope so," I said. "Maybe a judge will explain contract law to you." She turned and stomped down the steps, nearly tripping over her own heels. I watched her go, then closed the door and locked it. The next morning, I started hearing whispers. Turns out, the HOA had been quietly diverting funds from the community repair budget to pay for administrative upgrades, which included things like replacing Glenda's office furniture, buying premium coffee for board members, and hosting executive retreats at a lakeside resort 2 towns over. People were starting to ask questions, a lot of them. I wasn't the one spreading the information. That honor belonged to Jerry Vasquez, a retired postal inspector who lived 2 houses down. Jerry had been keeping receipts for years, just waiting for someone to push Glenda too far. Apparently, I was that someone. I found a yellow envelope on my porch that afternoon. No name on the front, just the word truth written in block letters. Inside were photocopies of bank statements, reimbursements, and invoices, some of them clearly marked "Do not distribute." There were even printouts of emails between board members, including one where Glenda told the treasurer to bury the landscaping expenses under maintenance. I made copies. Then I sent an anonymous package of the documents to every homeowner in the community. By Thursday, the neighborhood was boiling over. People started showing up to HOA meetings in record numbers. Normally, they were lucky to get 8 attendees. That week, they had over 60. Homeowners demanded a full financial audit and a vote of no confidence in the current board. Glenda tried to keep control of the room, but every time she opened her mouth, someone shouted her down. "You've been stealing from us," one woman yelled. "We pay our dues every month so you can drink gourmet coffee and hide the books. We trusted you," another man said. "And you tried to destroy someone over solar panels." The board tried to adjourn the meeting early, but the crowd wasn't having it. Someone called for an emergency recall vote. According to the bylaws, which I had printed and highlighted in my back pocket, it only took a 2/3 majority of voting members to remove a board member. And they had the numbers. The vote was scheduled for the following week. Glenda tried to delay it, claiming procedural issues, but Jerry stepped in with a notarized affidavit confirming every step had followed procedure. The HOA's own lawyer, a timid man named Alan who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, reluctantly confirmed everything was in order. The day before the vote, I got a call from a blocked number, Victor Tanner. The voice was low and cautious. "Who's asking?" "This is Detective Mallory with the County Fraud Division. We received some documentation concerning HOA misappropriation. I'd like to ask you a few questions." I agreed to meet him at his office. When I arrived, he already had the envelope I'd sent out and 2 additional folders filled with reports. Turns out, Jerry had submitted his own packet the day after mine. Between the 2 of us, they had enough to open a formal investigation. "Here's the issue," Mallory said, flipping through a stack of receipts. "Several of these charges were made using HOA funds but don't have proper authorization or board approval. That's embezzlement, plain and simple." "Is this going to be a criminal case?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "We'll start with subpoenas. If what we find matches what you've provided, charges are likely. Especially with the altered invoices." I left the station with a small grin tugging at the edge of my mouth. That night, Glenda's house went dark. No porch light, no blinds open, not even the glow of a TV. Word was she'd skipped town to visit family in Oklahoma, but I knew better. The next morning, the recall vote passed with 84% in favor. Glenda and 2 other board members were removed. Jerry was elected interim president, and his first act was to propose a full audit of the HOA's finances and a forensic review of the last 3 years of expenditures. They also voted to rescind the solar panel violation. I didn't say a word during the meeting. I didn't have to. As the new board took over, I walked home past the community center. For the first time in years, it felt like the place belonged to the people who actually lived here, not the ones who used it to feed their egos. I paused at the gate, looked up at the roof, and smiled. The solar panels caught the morning light just right. The following week was anything but quiet. With Glenda gone and the interim board digging through years of neglected records, Homeowners started uncorking years of frustration. Meetings spilled out of the community center onto the lawn. People brought folding chairs, coolers, even popcorn. It stopped being a formality and turned into full-blown civic theater. I kept a low profile. My solar panels were no longer under dispute, and my name hadn't come up at any of the meetings, something I'd intentionally arranged. I didn't need the spotlight. I just wanted the neighborhood to fix itself. But then things took a darker turn. On Tuesday morning, Jerry called me. His voice had an edge I hadn't heard before. They broke into the records room last night. Forced entry. Someone dumped the hard drives into the pool. That stopped me in my tracks. Wait, the HOA's internal server? Everything. Emails, scanned receipts, voting logs, the whole digital archive. Did you check the backups? They're gone too. Someone wiped the off-site storage account. We only know because the vendor sent a termination notice halfway through the board meeting. I didn't say anything for a moment. I could hear the faint hum of his old ceiling fan spinning above him. I hope you still have your copies, he added. I opened the locked drawer in my desk. The folder was still there, untouched. I hadn't uploaded anything to the cloud, too risky, just paper. Clean, irreplaceable paper. I've got them, I said. Every invoice and email I was sent. He exhaled, long and slow. Meet me in my garage in 20 minutes. Bring everything. By the time I arrived, Jerry had already spread out a folding table and lined it with manila folders, some of them dating back nearly a decade. His old coffee machine burbled in the corner like it was gasping for air. We've got a problem, he said. This wasn't just a cover-up. I think there's fraud connected to the contractor accounts. He pulled out a file and handed it to me. It was a printout of a vendor ledger, one I hadn't seen before. The name Windmere Landscaping appeared over and over again, charging exact amounts every 30 days. Recognize the name, he asked. No, I said. Should I? Because it doesn't exist, he said. I ran the business license through the state registry. No such company, never has been. I flipped through the invoices. Same logo, same address, a P.O. box in a strip mall halfway across town. Jerry tapped his pen on the table. That's over $90,000 in landscaping charges over 3 years, and not a single one has a work order attached. My stomach tightened. This is bigger than Glenda, I muttered. She wasn't alone. There had to be someone on the inside funneling payments. We both knew what had to be done. The next morning, we met with Detective Mallory again. This time, we brought duplicates of everything. He listened without interrupting as we laid out the vendor shell game, the off-the-books payments, and the deliberate destruction of electronic records. When we finished, he asked only one question. Do you have proof that the payments were approved without board consent? Jerry pulled out a folder labeled Board Votes Signed. Every entry had signatures from official meetings, except the ones connected to Windmere Landscaping. Those were missing or forged. Mallory leaned back in his chair, cracked his knuckles, and said, "That's enough for a search warrant." Within 48 hours, officers executed warrants at Glenda's old house, the HOA office, and the residence of a man named Craig Delaney, the former treasurer, who had quietly resigned 2 months before the scandal broke. Craig's house was a modest 2-story on the far edge of the neighborhood. When the police arrived, he tried to slip out the back door. They found him halfway over the fence with a duffel bag full of cash, burner phones, and a flash drive. They took him in without incident. The news hit the community like a lightning strike. For the first time in the neighborhood's history, an emergency press conference was held on the clubhouse lawn. Interim President Jerry stood at a makeshift podium next to a stern-faced officer from the county's Financial Crimes Division. The board has been cooperating fully with law enforcement, Jerry announced. We will be conducting a forensic audit of all finances and the results will be made public. This is your neighborhood. It belongs to you. Applause broke out, not polite, but raw and relieved. Later that evening, as I crossed the street back to my house, a woman I barely knew, Donna, from the cul-de-sac stepped out onto her porch and waved me over. I heard you were one of the first to call this out, she said. That true? I hesitated. I just didn't like being told to rip down something that saves my utility bill. She laughed, the kind of laugh people make when they've been angry for too long and finally feel light again. Well, I'm glad someone stood up to them. You gave us all permission to. Over the next week, the neighborhood transformed. People who'd never shown up to a single meeting were now volunteering to serve on committees. The clubhouse bulletin board overflowed with suggestions, gardening projects, a community fridge, even a dog park proposal. The best part, no one mentioned fines, or citations, or violations about mailbox paint. One morning, as I was checking my mailbox, the actual one, not the email inbox, I found a letter with a gold seal and no return address. Inside was a formal invitation to a neighborhood recognition ceremony. They were naming the community center after someone who had demonstrated integrity, resilience, and service without seeking recognition. I rolled my eyes. It was printed right there. Victor Tanner Community Hall. I didn't attend the ceremony. Instead, I stayed home, grilled a few burgers on the back patio, and watched the sun glint off the solar panels that had started this whole mess. From my yard, I could hear the laughter echoing from the clubhouse across the street. For the first time in years, it was just that a clubhouse. Not a fortress, not a throne, just a place where people gathered, not ruled. The new board hit the ground running with audits, policy reforms, and a full-blown community cleanup initiative. For the first time in years, the HOA wasn't a looming threat, it was actually doing what it was supposed to. But not everything could be fixed with goodwill and paint rollers. 3 weeks after Craig Delaney's arrest, I was called to testify at a preliminary hearing. The DA's office had filed multiple charges based on the documents Jerry and I had provided: wire fraud, misappropriation of funds, destruction of evidence, and conspiracy to defraud. Craig had retained a private attorney who looked like he'd walked straight out of a whiskey commercial: slicked hair, three-piece suit, and a permanent look of engineered concern. The courtroom was packed, not with tourists or press, but with neighbors, dozens of them. Some still wore their work uniforms, others carried their kids on their hips. They weren't there for drama, they were there for answers. When I took the stand, the prosecutor, a woman named Rivera, asked me to walk through the lease agreement first, the one that tied me to the land under the community center. It felt like ancient history already, but it was the thread that had unraveled everything. And did the defendant ever notify you directly regarding payments made to Windmere Landscaping? She asked. Never, I said. In fact, I only learned about the vendor through internal records after Glenda Simmons was removed from the board. Did you ever witness any landscaping work performed by this alleged company? Nothing beyond routine maintenance done by other crews. Certainly not enough to justify the amounts billed. She nodded and handed the judge a packet of images, drone photos I'd taken over the last year. Not one showed any work being done on the grounds coinciding with the dates on the invoices. The judge flipped through them slowly, pale brows furrowing. The defense attorney rose and tried to pivot. Mr. Tanner, isn't it true you had personal conflicts with the HOA prior to this investigation? I had a disagreement over solar panel installation, I said. It was handled legally. Some might say your motivations were retaliatory. I leaned forward. If exposing theft and protecting my neighbors is considered retaliation, then I guess I'm guilty. A few people in the gallery chuckled. The judge didn't admonish them. By the time I left the stand, it was clear the tide had turned. The judge ruled that the case would proceed to trial, and Craig Delaney was denied bail. His assets, including his house, car, and a lakefront property under his wife's name, were frozen under a court order. That same afternoon, Rivera approached me outside the courthouse. We matched Craig's bank records against the HOA accounts, she said. There's more. He funneled nearly $60,000 into a shell corporation registered under his cousin's name, no tax filings, no business license. We're adding tax evasion to the charges. You think he'll flip? I asked. If he doesn't, he's looking at over 20 years. She paused, then added, and we're not done. We've opened a separate file on Glenda Simmons. She's currently in Arizona, but we've issued a request for voluntary appearance. If she doesn't show, we'll escalate. I didn't ask what that meant. I didn't have to. Back in the neighborhood, the mood had shifted. The energy was still high, but now it was focused. People who used to keep to themselves were showing up to community workdays, planting trees, repainting fences, and hosting potlucks. The clubhouse lawn had turned into something out of a Norman Rockwell painting. One evening, I found Jerry reorganizing the old filing cabinet in the newly renamed community center. He ditched the metal desk Glenda once used and replaced it with a salvaged workbench from his garage. It still had paint splatters on the side. "You really think this place can change for good?" I asked. He looked up from a stack of folders. "Only if we stop trying to manage people and start listening to them." He handed me a file labeled Bylaw Overhaul Draft 1. No more arbitrary fines, no more surprise inspections. Every rule change has to be voted on in public. Simple, democratic, boring. "Boring sounds great," I said. Then he gestured toward a smaller folder beneath it. "That one's for you." I opened it. Inside was a proposal. A permanent easement agreement granting the HOA access to the land under the community center, with rent locked in at a fair market rate, renewable every 10 years by community vote. No more sweetheart deals. No more leverage games. "You don't need to do this," I said. "I know," Jerry replied, "but that's why it matters." I signed it that night. The next week, Glenda returned, not on her own, but in cuffs, escorted off a plane at the airport by 2 plainclothes investigators. Her arrest made the local news. Former HOA president charged with felony conspiracy and destruction of public records. They even showed a blurry photo of her being led through the terminal, lips pressed tight, blouse wrinkled for the second time in her life. Neighbors didn't celebrate. They didn't gloat. They just kept working on their gardens and showing up to meetings. The whole mood had shifted from vengeance to vigilance. At the sentencing hearing 4 months later, Craig pled guilty to avoid a trial. The judge sentenced him to 12 years with no parole for the first 6, along with restitution of the stolen funds. Glenda followed 2 weeks later. She got 8 years and a lifetime ban from serving on any housing or property board. The restitution funds were returned directly to the HOA, and the new board voted unanimously to use every dollar on visible improvements, park benches, shade structures, and a scholarship fund for local teens pursuing trade school. I didn't attend the final board meeting of the year, but I heard what happened. They passed the new bylaws, adopted a full transparency clause, and created a rotating citizen oversight committee so no one ever held power for too long. The system wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was honest now. A few months later, I was working in my garage when I noticed a group of teenagers walking past with clipboards and measuring tape. One of them stopped and pointed at my roof. "Those are the panels," he said. "The ones that started the whole thing." I laughed to myself and kept sanding the table I was restoring. The panels weren't the cause. They were just the first thing someone tried to control. What mattered was what came after. A neighborhood that finally remembered what it meant to look out for each other, not just rules, but people. Not just appearances, but actions. And no one, not Glenda, not Craig, not any future board member with a taste for power would ever forget who actually owned the land they stood on.